Okay, Boker Tov, everybody. Chodesh Tov.
Yes.
Let's dedicate the shiur to some good news coming out from our armed forces, who are doing a wonderful job. Let's pray that we get the job done, or they get the job done, and this learning should be in their merit, that they should have success in everything that they do. Okay, we spoke last week about the question as to how a Kohen Gadol could possibly give evidence, and we spoke about whether it was beneath his dignity and all that kind of stuff. And we ended up with the idea that the only way that a Kohen Gadol could give evidence was if it was against or was giving evidence in the case of the son of a king, and the king was present at the court case. In that case, it would not be beneath his dignity, and he would be able to do it. And then we got to, I shall share the screen right now. Hang on. There we go. Tell me when you've got it. Yeah, okay. Then we got to this bit here. That's
so
where
Johnny,
we ended up.
Could he be called for the prosecution and the defence?
He can be called for either.
Okay, thank you.
But only if the king is there. And as we said last week, the king is not allowed to be on the Sanhedrin, so he could only have been there as an observer. And then the Gemarah said, well, what would he do there as an observer? Why would he be there? And the answer is because his son is part of the case, whatever, one side or the other, and therefore he's gone to see what's going on. And because he is there, it's no longer considered beneath the dignity of the Kohen Gadol, because he's going in the presence of the king. And so we then said that neither a king nor a Kohen Gadol could be involved in the intercalation of another month. In other words, making a leap year. And we said that the reason for that was because they might have a vested interest. And we said that the king might have a vested interest because he might have a vested interest in extending the year by an extra month. Anybody remember why?
To get more taxes in, something like that. Yep.
Not quite, but you're on the right lines. Julia, you're muted.
It's to do with the army, and the two would have to pay extra salary.
Well, the other way around. He paid them on a yearly basis, and he would get 13 months out of them for only 12 months' salary. So it would be in his interest to extend the year because he gets a free month out of the army. We understood that. That's vested interest, and therefore he can't be on the adjudicating panel. What about the Kohen Gadol? That was a little bit more esoteric. Does anybody remember what his vested interest was?
That was to do with going to the mikveh, and that it would be too cold for him.
Yes, that's right. But not to extend the year, because that would meant the month of Tishrei.
Broken up. You're broken up, Johnny. You're broken up.
Broken up.
You're broken up. You're broken up.
Better? Any better? No, can't hear me. Iffy. Okay, any better? No?
A little bit, but it's broken up.
Okay, what shall I do?
That's better, yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't do anything. It just got better on its own. It's a bit like when you go to the doctor and you don't do anything and it gets better on its own, right? You're best not to do anything. So if the Kohen Gadol has a vested interest not to extend the year, because if you extend the year by sticking an extra month in, that means the month of Tishrei when he has on Yom Kippur to go dunking in the mikveh is going to be a month later, and it will be cold. And he also has to walk barefoot in the Bet HaMikdash. That's, by the way, why the Kohenim take their shoes off to duchen, because there were no shoes worn in the Bet HaMikdash. So he's wandering around, jumping in and out of the mikveh on Yom Kippur, and he doesn't want it to be cold. So he thinks to himself, we'll not make an extra month. And so he's got a vested interest. And as we said right at the end of the last week's shiur, it is enshrined in all proper legal systems that anybody who has a vested interest cannot be on a judging panel, because it won't be objective, it won't be fair. And so the halacha is that a king and a Kohen Gadol cannot be on the panel which decides either to extend or not to extend the year. And that's where we ended. And so, can you still see the screen? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so this is where we're up to. Omar Rav Papa. On the back of the discussion about making the year longer, Rav Papa has something to say about it. He says, Shma Mina, let us learn from here. From where? From the idea that the Kohen Gadol might not want to extend the year because it will be cold in Tishrei. Let's learn from this, Batar Yarcha Azil, that the year follows the months. What does that mean? Rosh Steinsaltz explains, meaning that changes in the seasons are in accordance with the sequence of the months in the standard non-intercalated year. Now, what that means is, what was the Kohen Gadol worried about? He's worried that Tishrei is going to be cold. So that means that the normal Tishrei is less cold, right? Tishrei is colder when it's later. That's obvious. So Rav Papa says, we know from here, therefore, that the seasons fit with the non-leap year, and that it's the right seasons at the right time in the non-leap year. Okay? And so the Gemara says, wait a minute, that can't be right. Ini, that means, is that the case? How can that possibly be? It can't make sense, that, can it? Why? What is the main reason why we intercalate the year? What's the main reason why we have a leap year?
Pesach in the spring.
Pesach has to be in the spring. So that's a proof in itself, isn't it? That the whole point of this messing around with the year is so that the seasons will fit, which is not what the Muslims do for their Ramadan. They don't have, the Muslims also work on a lunar calendar, but they don't have the correction of the leap year. So their Ramadan, which is a month, gets 11 days earlier each year. So every 3 years, it goes a month earlier. So every 18 years, it's half a year earlier. So it'll be in the summer, and then the next year it'll be a bit earlier, and next year it'll be in the spring. 6 months after, it'll be in the winter, and another 6 months after that, it'll be back to the summer again. We don't have that because Pesach has to be in the spring, as Michael said. So it's a proof that Rav Papa is not right, because the months, the seasons, don't just go according to the normal year. They go according to the whole business, and that's the whole point why we have a year. And so he brings as a proof a very interesting story. Now, before we go into the story of the Gemara, who has heard the expression red sky at night, shepherd's delight? Who can finish it off for me?
I
Go
can.
on, Michael.
I
Go on.
I
Yes.
have it. I
Go on,
have
Sharon.
it as red at night, sailors delight. Red in the morning, sailors take warning.
Okay, so we have it as in England as shepherds, but the same idea. Red sky
No.
at night, shepherd's delight. Red sky in the morning, shepherd's warning. And I'm
No,
sure it's this.
It's mixed.
What,
It's shepherds at night and sailor in the morning.
oh, is that right? Well, okay, that's not what I saw, but okay, well that makes sense. That keeps everybody happy because that. Okay, so I was more interested, to be honest, in the shepherds than I was in the sailors, and you will see why in a second. But what does it tell us? Red sky at night, shepherd's delight. What does that tell us?
The weather's going to be fine, presumably, the next day.
The
To
weather's
do
going
with
to
the
be.
sunset.
Yeah, it's something to do with the sunset. Weather's going to be fine. I'm interested in it being the shepherds. Why is it a shepherd's delight?
They gather in the flocks earlier or later. I'm not sure which.
Yeah, they're working out in the fields, aren't they, with their flocks? So they know about these things. What do we know? We're sat inside, most of us. We're not manual workers. We don't work on a farm. We don't look after animals or grow stuff. What are we doing? We're sat in front of a computer all day long. What do we know about seasons? It's the shepherds and the sailors that look at the sky and say, that's going to be a bit of a problem, or oh, it's going to be a nice day tomorrow. I remember being told, I don't know if it's true, anybody confirm this, that if you see the cows lying down, it means it's going to rain because they're trying to keep their spot dry. Does anybody know if that's rubbish, or is that just is it true, or is it just a load of rubbish that we've been told? Does anybody know? None of you know, do you? Because none of you are cow farmers. Anyway, the point that I'm making is that people that work out in the fields or sailors that work out on the seas, they know about the weather. And the Gemarah is now going to give us some examples of that. Okay, so the Gemarah asked the question of Rav Papa. Rav Papa made a statement to say that the weather, the seasons are fixed, as it were, by the calendar. And the Gemarah says, Ini, is that the case? Vaha hanach shlosha ro'ei bakar. There was once a situation where there were 3 cattle herders. These are ro'ei. Ro'ei is a shepherd, but we don't normally use the word shepherd, do we, in English? Shepherds. Has shepherd got to be sheep? Can you have a shepherd for bakar? Bakar are cattle. What's a cattle shepherd called in English? Anybody know? A herdsman. Yeah, a herdsman. Anyway, Roe Bakar, he's a herdsman. There were 3 of them.
A cowboy.
A cowboy, right. Yeah, that's got another connotation, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I think of it as a drover, D-R-O-V-E-R.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that word. Any English folk familiar with the word drover? Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, from the westerns.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, but as you're only familiar with it from the Americans, though.
Yeah.
I think, Sharon, that might be an American expression. Thank you for teaching it to us. Anyway, there are 3 herdsmen, drovers, whatever they're called, at Dahavu Kaimi. They were standing around. And what were they doing when they were standing around? They were chatting. And they must have been English, these shepherds, these drovers, because they were talking about the weather. That's what English people do, isn't it? They talk about the weather all the time. And they were talking about the weather. Ushma'inhu Rabbanan. And the rabbis overheard their conversation. The Ka'amri, they were saying, they were talking to one another. Chad Amar, one of them said, Im Bakir Velakish Kechada Yenetz. If the first grains and the later grains all are sprouting at the same time, Dinhu Adar, then it must be the month of Adar. Only in Adar do you find the first grains and the later grains. The The Art Scroll translates this slightly differently and tells us that the early crop, the early grains, the first grains, what are they? What did they plant first? Wheat. And the later ones? Have a guess?
Oh,
Barley.
no.
Barley. What did you say, Jeffrey?
Corn.
They didn't have corn in those days. Corn was a much later, except in China anyway, corn was a much later introduction to the West. How do I know that, by the way? How do I know that corn was introduced later? Anyone?
Because of your shiur about what we can about kitniot.
Yes, Julia, correct. Kitniot. Corn is New World kitniot, not Old World kitniot. Kitniot, corn did not exist in the West in the 13th century, at least not in Provence anyway. As far as I understand, it was introduced much later, although it was in existence in the East. So yes, couldn't have been corn, Jeffrey, it was barley, wheat and barley. Wheat was the first grains, barley was the later grains. The point being here that if they were both sprouting, so you'd have the first grains were still in sprout and the later ones, the barley had just begun, then that must be, says this drover, I like that word, this drover says it must be the month of Adar and not the month of Shvat. Shvat is the month before Adar. So if it's Adar and not Shvat, then it's that little bit later, isn't it? It's a little bit later. So, and then the next one said, so that was our first saying of the drover. If the first and the later grains are sprouting, it must be Adar. The next one, Im Tor Bitzvar Bitlag Yamut. Okay, now I'm going to show you a little bit of Aramaic grammar, I suppose you'd call it here. In Aramaic, there are various letters that are interchangeable with the Hebrew, one of which is a taf for a shin. Now, in that sentence that I've just read to you, all those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words, excluding the last taf of the word yamut, there are 2 tafs. Im tor, bitzvar, bitalag.
Sure as an ox.
Sure is an ox. Good.
Yeah.
So Johnny is ahead of me. He's transferred that taf into a shin. So tor in Aramaic is the same as shor in Hebrew, which is an ox. So if the ox bitzvar, that means in the cold. It means in the morning, but tzfar is the morning. In the morning cold, bitalag. Right, transfer the taf to a shin again.
The sheleg, snow. Sheleg.
Snow. That's right. Sheleg is snow. So, but im tor bitzvar bitalag yamut. If an ox would be so cold that he would die in the snow in the morning, uvetihara betul te'ena yidmoch yashlach mashken, and in the afternoon or later on in the heat of the day, betul te'ena. What's te'ena?
Fig.
Yes, te'ena is a fig. So what does this ox do? Assuming it hasn't died in the morning, it's a different ox now because the one in the morning's died in the cold. So another ox comes along at noon and he goes to a fig tree, yashlach mashke, and he strips off his skin. So basically he goes to the fig tree and he scratches himself against the fig tree. What's he doing under the fig tree at noon?
Taking off his skin.
Shading.
Why? He's what, Johnny?
It's hot. It's hot. You go under the tree.
He's hot. He's shading it. He's all sweaty, so he's scratching himself, and he's under the shade of the fig tree. So what does this tell us? That it's cold in the morning, cold enough for snow. What does that tell you, by the way? Where are these herdsmen, these
In the
drovers?
mountains somewhere.
They're in the mountains. They can't be in Netanya, can they? Because we don't have snow in Netanya, even in the depths of winter. So it's somewhere up in the mountains. So this herdsman, this drover, says that if it is so cold in the morning that it could snow, and on the same day it's so hot at midday that the ox is schwitzing its head off, then what month must it be? Dinhu Adar.
Yeah.
It must be the month of Adar, when the season changes. Adar is when the season starts to change. Okay, so that's another. V'im lav, and if not, lit den Adar. It's not Adar, it must be Shvat. If it's not hot enough for the ox to schwitz its head off at lunchtime, then it must still be Shvat. Okay, that's the second one. Remember, there were three of these. It's a bit like the Four Yorkshiremen sketch here, isn't it? They're all trying to outdo one another. So the third one says the following. Chad Amar, the third one says, one of them says, Im kidum takif lechada yehei. If there is kidum, what's the word kidum? What's the root of the word kidum?
It is kedem.
Yeah. Kedem.
Kedem.
Yes, kedem. Kedem means east. East. Gan Eden mikedem. Yes. Sheva brachot. Gan Eden was in the east. So im kidum takif. If the kidum is the east wind, if the wind coming from the east is really, really strong. Now, what do we know about an east wind? Isn't there an English expression? Something wind that an east wind blows no good, or something like that. Isn't there an expression like that about a wind not blowing good tidings? Or am I getting it mixed up with something?
When the north wind will blow, we will have snow.
Oh, there you go. Right. Okay. So that's coming from the north. Well, the equivalent in our area is the east, apparently. East winds are cold, presumably because they're coming from Siberia or somewhere like that. I'm not very good at geography, so maybe I'm wrong about that. But anyway, an east wind is cold. An east wind is cold. So our shepherd says, if the east wind is cold, and yet yipach beloach nafek lekiblei. What does yipach mean? If something is okay, any bakers here? Anyone? Any bakers? Anyone like to bake cakes? Yeah, Avril Gatov nodding a bit. She likes to bake a bit. Avril Gatov, tell me how you say self-raising flour in Hebrew.
Don't know, sorry.
Anybody know how you say self-raising flour?
Don't know.
Neither do I, but it's something like kemach metupach or nitpach or something like that. Nitpach means to be blown up. If something is swollen, if you have a swollen wrist, you have something, it is nitpach. Here, yipach means to blow out. So yipach beloach. Beloach. What does beloach mean? What is in Hebrew beliyah? We also know it from halakha. Beliyah means to swallow. So
Broken up again, Johnny. Broken up again.
you can't hear me again. How about now? Tell me when you can hear me. I'll keep talking until you can hear me properly. No good. No. Somebody talk to me and see if I can hear you.
Tell me
No,
your sounds.
Well, am I a Dalek again? No good.
Getting better.
Getting better.
yes,
Better.
okay.
Okay, right. So beliyah is to swallow. Beloach means your cheeks. You can blow out your breath. If you blow out your breath, Nafek likible. It will blow away the cold east wind. So it's another expression of, on the one hand, it's cold, but it's not that cold that your warm breath will disperse the cold. We have an English expression, don't we? It was so cold, it took my breath away.
Yeah.
Okay. So here, this is, if it's not so cold that it takes your breath away, the other way around, if your breath can take away the cold air, then, says the shepherd, din hu adar, it must be adar, v'im lav, let din adar. So there, this proves, therefore, the Ibru harabanan lahi shata. And this proves the sages then listened to those shepherds talking about the weather, and then they made their decision about whether to intercalate the year, which proves that what Rav Papa said up here, which was that it goes according to the non-leap year, is not true, because the rabbis made the decision to make the leap year, in this case, on the basis of them overhearing these shepherds talking about the weather. So the Gemarah says, you're not right, Rav Papa. And now the Gemarah says, nah, that's not right. You're not right. V'tispera Rabban Aravata Samuch. Are you telling me, says the Gemarah, that the rabbis are going to rely on these cattle herders, these drovers? Nah. Ella, rather, Rabbanan Achushbenaihu Samuch. What does Samuch mean? If Ani Somech, what's smicha?
Laying.
To lay on, to rely on.
The lay on of hands, to
Yeah.
rely on. That's right. Somebody who has smicha has had his hands laid upon him by the person giving him the smicha. Moshe gave Yehoshua smicha by somech, his hands. Okay, so they rely on achashbonaihu. What's the root of that word? There, achashbonaihu. Cheshbon. Cheshbon. That's very good, Leslie. You're a roe cheshbon, aren't you?
Yeah, indeed. Well, I was.
You were. Okay. What is a roe cheshbon?
Okay.
An accountant.
An accountant. And what do accountants do?
Mess up with figures.
They mess about with figures. That's right. So the Gemara is telling us here that the rabbis would not rely on these old wives' tales of shepherd's delight at night and all that stuff, and these herdsmen saying about, you know, if the ox is dead in the morning and schwitzing in the afternoon. They're not going to rely on that. They'll make their own calculations. They will rely on their own messing about with figures. They're not going to rely on anybody else. Varoe bakar.
Say about the grains they could actually see growing, couldn't they?
That they could see that for themselves. That's true.
Yeah.
But they'd work their own calculations out. Varoe bakar istayuhu, the istayuhu milte. And very nice, the cattle herders, if their statements are supportive of the rabbi's calculations, all well and good, very nice. And what it doesn't say here in brackets is, if not, they'll ignore them, because the rabbis will make their own calculations. They're not going to rely on the herdsman. So it's just an interesting little aside that the Gemarah tells us about, which gives us a little insight into the agricultural calculations of the shepherds. Okay, that is that. That's the end of that story altogether. We're now on to the next category altogether. The Gemarah is now going back to the next bit of the Mishnah. So really, we should go back to the Mishnah and look what the Mishnah said. It's talking about the Kohen.
Johnny, a little note at the bottom says that Tor and we say it's like sure because you change the letters around, could mean a bird or a dove plucking, and instead of scratching back, it could be plucking its feathers under the tree.
I saw that. I saw
Yeah.
that. Where did I see that? Was it in
And the bottom of
previous page?
Steinfeld. Bottom of
Yeah,
Steinfeld.
there it is. It's on the screen now. Yeah, I
Yeah.
saw that earlier on today.
Yeah.
Some commentaries understand the word tor to refer to not to an ox, but a type of a dove. The bird is described as being very cold in the morning, but plucking its own feathers to cool itself at noon. Same idea that the weather is what we would call what the weather forecasters used to call changeable weather. But yeah, whether it was an ox or a dove, either way, it was cold in the morning and hot in the afternoon.
Interesting that the beginning you talked about the month of Tishri and the Kohen Gadol and the cold. I've never known it cold here, Yom Kippur, whether it's early or late. So it must be referring to Yerushalayim.
Well, that's where he was, wasn't he? That's where the Kohen Gadol was.
It's never been cold here on Yom Kippur.
The latest in a leap year that Yom Kippur can be is mid-October.
Yeah, that's usually warm.
The latest it can be, because the latest that Rosh Hashanah can be is the 6th of October. This year, I think it's about the 4th of October, something like that. But the latest it can be, I think, is the 6th, which would make Yom Kippur the 15th of October. So I guess that there must be times where it has happened in Yerushalayim where the 15th of October has been particularly cold.
Yes, higher up.
Certainly colder than on the 15th of September, which is one of the earliest times it can be. Has anybody ever known Rosh Hashanah to be in August? No, it can't be. The earliest that Rosh Hashanah can be is the 3rd of September, to the best of my knowledge, which would make the earliest time for Yom Kippur the 12th of September. So there's obviously a big difference in temperature, or there could be a big difference in temperature. If you had an exceptionally warm September and an exceptionally cold October, there could be a very significant difference in that month in the temperature in Yerushalayim. So it's certainly not beyond the realms of possibility. But as you said earlier on, Johnny, these shepherd people, these herdsmen, drovers, were up in the mountains. We know that because of the snow. Although there can be snow in Jerusalem, of course, but I don't know that they did a lot of shepherding in Jerusalem. Yes, Julia.
It bothers me a bit that we've just spent the last half hour on intercalation. We spent weeks and weeks on intercalation, which I found very, very difficult and was very glad when it finished. And now it's introduced slightly. And I wonder, is there any compilation? Because this all came about because Rav Papa made this one comment. But is there any compilation of all the aspects of the Gemarah that deal with intercalation, and how does this bit fit in with what we learned months ago? Because
very good question. Very good question. This is a feature of the way the Gemarah evolved, because as we've said before, it's a bunch of rabbis sitting around having a discussion. One goes off at a tangent here and he says, "Oh, while we're mentioning that, we'll talk about this." And it's all over the place. As you say, this bit of intercalation should have been over there, shouldn't it? So, yes, your observation is correct. And the answer to your question is yes. That when it came to codifying Jewish law, what the rabbis who codified Jewish law, now the most famous one that we know is the Shulchan Aruch. Now, he wasn't the first. He was just the one that, I don't know, got lucky and was the most famous because there were the ones that came before him. But all of the codifiers, starting, I suppose, the most, even perhaps as famous or maybe even more famous than the Shulchan Aruch is the Rambam, Maimonides. and in his Mishnah Torah, he has put stuff in sections. Have I gone all wobbly?
Yeah, a little bit.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you? I'm okay. Shall I carry on?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what they did, what the codifiers did, was exactly what you're suggesting, Julia. They went through the whole Gemara and they took all the bits of halacha on intercalation and put it all together in Hilchot Ibor Hashana, the halachot of intercalation. And they took the bits from here and the bits from there and the bits from over there, and they put them all together into a sensible, chronological, not chronological, no, that's not the right word, in subject order. The Gemara is the source of their halachot. That's where they get their sources from, and then they will build on that, and they bring it all together. The Shulchan Aruch. What does that mean? Shulchan Aruch. What do those words mean?
The arrangement of the menu.
The table is set. The meal is
The
served.
table, correct. The table is set. Now, how do you set a table?
In order.
In order, exactly. You have your hors d'oeuvre knives and forks on the outside, don't you? And then you have your next course, your soup spoon, and then you have your main course, and you have everything is in a set order. When you set the table, you don't just throw everything on. Well, some people do, but you're not meant to, are you? You're meant to set it all nice and neatly. It goes in, everything has a set place.
Johnny,
That's
I have a
what-
question.
Yes, Sharon.
My question is, in those codifications or compilations or order-making works, are minority positions preserved, or is it only set out the halacha and all of the argument and glosses that we see in Gemara are discarded for the purpose of utility?
Good question again. And the answer is a bit of both. Because of its very nature, these codifications are there to teach us exactly what to do. And so it comes along and says, this is the bottom line, guys. This is what you've got to do. Often, however, there will be bits in, let's say, the Shulchan Aruch, which say, Yesh nohagin. There are others who have the custom to do something different. So it doesn't bring all the minority opinions because it would be unwieldy, but it doesn't ignore them altogether. So the answer to your question is a bit of both. It's largely they are all largely instruction manuals with a little bit of leeway for other opinions. Now, different codifiers come to different conclusions. So, for example, if you look at the Shulchan Aruch, you will find in every Shulchan Aruch that you open, you will have something after each bit, each seif, after each clause, you will have something that says Hageh, Hey Gimel Hey, which means a consideration. And there you will find the comments of somebody called the Ramah. Who wrote the Shulchan Aruch? Rabbi Yosef Karo, correct. Rabbi Joseph Karo. Then along came a chap called Rabbi Moshe Isserlis, known as the Ramah, Rabbi Moshe Isserlis. And he wrote a gloss on the Shulchan Aruch. And often he disagrees with the final decision of the Shulchan Aruch and gives a different opinion, sometimes a minority opinion, as Sharon has suggested. So together with the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, we get the majority of the main opinions, if you like. Now, just as a matter of interest, not always, but generally speaking, the Sephardim follow the rulings of the Shulchan Aruch of Reb Yosef Karo. Generally speaking, the Ashkenazim, if there is a difference between Reb Yosef Karo, Shulchan Aruch, and Reb Moshe Isserles, the Ramah, if there is a difference in opinion in the halacha between the two, generally speaking, the Ashkenazim follow the Ramah, follow Reb Moshe Isserles. Not 100% that way, but very, very big majority of time, the Ashkenazim follow the Ramah and the Sephardim follow the Shulchan Aruch. And if you, interestingly, if you look in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, which is the abridged version, which was written by Gantzfried, I can't remember his first name, Rabbi something Gantzfried, can't remember his first name now, Eliezer maybe, can't remember. Anyway, Rabbi Gantzfried, he wrote that, he was an Ashkenazi, and he brings most of the psakim that he brings there are actually from the Ramah. And if you look at one of the most famous versions of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, has its own gloss from somebody called the Ben Ish Chai, who was a Sephardi posek. And so he then turns it upside down and says, no, we don't paskin like them. That's the Ashkenazim. We paskin like the Sephardim. So this is where the difference in opinion comes from. So to answer Sharon's question is that the codifiers largely give their opinion with some glosses, but then along comes often a second gloss to which another group of people might follow. So, for example, Chabad follow a third codifier, somebody called Shulchan Aruch Harav, a different codifier altogether, who has slight differences, and they follow the Shulchan Aruch Harav. So there are slight differences in the different codifiers. But the main answer to the question is that, to Julia's question, is yes, these were all taken from the Gemarah and put in some kind of sensible order. Okay, let's go back to the Gemarah and do the next bit. We're talking about the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. Can a high priest do Chalitza, and can the brother of a high priest do Chalitza with the high priest's wife if the high priest dies? Without looking, what would you say would be the answer to that?
No.
Avril Gatov says no. Why, Avril Gatov, do you say no?
Because the Chalitza process is like shame them.
It is, isn't it? The whole point of it, the whole point of the Chalitza is to humiliate the person doing it. You have to spit in front of him and a shoe is thrown. We've seen the process, haven't we? I showed it you on the video. I showed you a video of it in New York. I showed you a video of it in Tehran. Really interesting. But it's a humiliating process. And certainly, if giving evidence would be considered beneath the dignity of a Kohen Gadol, surely Chalitza would be beneath the dignity of the Kohen Gadol. So that's what I think. And it seems, however, that it's not the case. And I don't understand why it's not the case. The only way I can think of that it's not the case is what the Gemarah is going to tell us in a minute.
You're breaking up, Johnny. Sorry.
This internet is getting on my nerves today. Tell me when I'm backing murder sound. No. Murder sound. Can't hear me. No. Getting better.
Like
improving.
Yeah.
Better. Okay. There's only one reason why he might be able to do Chalitza, because you would have thought, and I would have thought, like Avril said, they were beneath his dignity. Why might he be able to do Chalitza even though it's beneath his dignity?
Because is it a mitzvah to do it?
Okay, it's a
Or a
mitzvah.
commandment to do it?
It's a mitzvah and a commandment to give evidence if you've got evidence to give as well.
Oh, okay.
What's the alternative to Chalitza?
Proper.
Yes, it's called Yibum. Yibum, where he actually has to marry the widow. He has to marry the widow.
Yeah.
Now, what's the problem with that?
He's not allowed to.
He's not allowed to. So he can't do Yibum. Why is he not allowed to, Julia?
I think we've already discussed it and I can't remember why.
Okay, let me show you why. It comes from Parashat Emor. You will hear it said a week on Shabbat. It's on the screen. Jeffrey, read us the screen, right? Verse 14 on the screen, please.
A widow, a divorcee, a woman who is desecrated, or a prostitute, he shall not marry any of these. Only a virgin of his people may he take as a wife.
We're talking about the Kohen Gadol. He's not allowed to marry a widow. It says so in the Torah. Now, by definition, the person who he's got to do Chalitza with is a widow, because it's the widow of his brother. So let's go back to the Gemarah. He can't do Chalitza, can he? Sorry, he can't do Yibum because he's not allowed. So if he can't do Yibum, then he has to do Chalitza, even though it's beneath his dignity. Because if you say it's beneath your dignity, you can't do Chalitza, well, then he's got to do Yibum. He's got to do one or the other. So what's the least worst option? That's terrible English, isn't it? What's the expression Rabba miuto in Hebrew? I can't think of the English expression. The lesser of the two evils. That's right. The lesser of the two evils. Break a Torah law and do Yibum. Well, you can't do that. Or do something which is beneath your dignity. So you know what? I have to do the thing that's beneath my dignity because I can't do the thing which is against Torah law. So I can't do Yibum, so it has to be Chalitza. So that, whilst Avril is correct that you would think it's beneath his dignity, that is exactly why the Gemarah is coming along and telling us he can do Chalitza. You might think he can't because it's beneath his dignity. Not true, says the Gemarah. It is beneath his dignity, but it's better than breaking a Torah law. Now,
Johnny, can you think of another example where a particular category of person is forbidden to do a certain action, and as a result, he's therefore exempt from a mitzvah? Because this is what we're inferring in this particular case. And therefore,
we mentioned
instead of saying that he has to demean himself by doing Chalitza, can't we turn it the other way around and say that he doesn't have to do Chalitza because of the fact that he's forbidden from marrying the widow in the first place?
So you're trying to say that
yeah.
What you're trying to say is that Chalitza shouldn't even come into it.
Exactly.
Because Chalitza is only to get out of Yibum.
Yeah.
And he can't do Yibum anyway. So if a person's widow, if a person dies childless and he has a widow, and somebody comes along who's not a brother of the deceased and says, I'll do Yibum. Well, he doesn't need to do Chalitza if he changes his mind, does he? Because he's not got an obligation to do Yibum. So what
Not
David
only
is
does he
saying,
hasn't got an obligation, he can't do Yibum, because by doing Yibum would be that he would be over of a love.
well, in the Kohen Gadol's case, that's right.
Yes, yes.
So, but the example I was giving is another person can't do Yibum because he's not a brother.
Correct.
So he doesn't have to do Chalitza. I'm supporting your view. So,
Yeah.
So what David is saying is, you might have thought that Chalitza never comes into the equation for a Kohen Gadol because he can't do Yibum. So if he can't do Yibum, he doesn't need to do anything to get out of it, which is Chalitza. But that can't be the case, can it? Because otherwise, the Mishnah would have not say Choletz v'chotzin. So maybe David, maybe this is part of the Gemara. Maybe the Gemara is telling us that your Havamina, your theory, can't be right.
The reason surely is that
was,
it leaves the woman in a difficult position. It doesn't consider the woman's status.
Ah, there's a point. There's a point, David. We've looked at this from the Kohen's point of view. The Kohen can't do Yibum. But that's brilliant, Julia. From the woman's perspective, she can't get married until somebody does either Yibum or Chalitza.
That makes sense.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. That's typical male. Me and David have looked at it from the man's perspective, and Julia has looked at it from the woman. That's why we need women on the Sanhedrin, everyone. That's why we need women. They look at things so completely differently. That is super. Because
can I just
go on, Michael?
Can I just ask a slightly off-piece question? If he isn't Kohen Gadol and his brother dies childless and he has to do Yibum, does that automatically mean that he cannot become high priest eventually because he's actually done this, or can he still become a high priest if it's before he was high priest?
Well, he can't do Yibum, that's for sure. He can do it as a Kohen, a regular Kohen can marry. Wait, let me just think it through. A regular Kohen can marry a widow, right? He can't marry a divorcee, but he can marry a widow. So right, a regular Kohen. So
he's done this as a Kohen, and then he's put forward to be Kohen Gadol. Can he become Kohen Gadol because previously he's done Yibum?
Does it disqualify him? Does a previous Yibum disqualify him from being a Kohen Gadol? I don't know, but my logic tells me no, because he wasn't a Kohen Gadol. He's not done as a Kohen Gadol. He's not married a widow. On the other hand, you might argue he is a Kohen Gadol and he is married to a widow. I don't know. It's a good question. I will try and find the answer.
Thank you.
I don't know. I'm going to ask that question of, but I will try and find the answer. I'll start with the easy person that I can get hold of, which is my son, and I'll give him the job of finding the answer. Don't do anything else all day. Let him do some work for once. Yeah, they had 252 people through their house as guests over Pesach. Lunatics they are. Anyway, I'll ask him the question. I don't know. It's a good question. Good question. I'm going to put my neck on the line and say I think that it doesn't disqualify him, but that's what my logic's saying. That. Well, I'll try and find the real answer for you. Yes, David.
Yeah, I've got another answer to my question that I found here. That you've got two mitzvahs. You've got a positive mitzvah and a negative.
Coming to that. Yeah, we're coming to that in a bit in the Gemara. We're coming to that in a bit in the Gemara. So let's not jump the gun on that. Julia's answer is brilliant, though. And that is that we cannot allow the woman to be in limbo land and not be able to marry anyone else. And in order for her to be freed up, as it were, from that aguna type of situation, the Kohen Gadol either has to do Yibum, which he's not allowed to, or he has to demean himself and do Chalitza. And so he has to do the Chalitza. says that.
So again, you could make a similar exception for Julia's case, that on the grounds that the Kohen Gadol isn't allowed to perform Yibum. Sorry, isn't allowed to take her as a Yibum, as a Yavama. Then the woman should be excluded from the process as well. If her brother-in-law is a Kohen Gadol.
Okay, you could argue that. In which case, there would not be any Chalitza today, would there? Because today we don't allow Yibum. And therefore, why would we make people do Chalitza today? Which is what happens. If you have a Yibum situation, we make them do Chalitza. So clearly, I mean, there is nothing wrong with a Kohen Gadol doing Chalitza. It's not forbidden. It's just something which is demeaning to the position, and therefore, why should we demean the woman as opposed to the Kohen Gadol in a way? So, yeah, you could argue your argument. I think is solid, but I think the point is that the Mishnah tells us. That's the starting point. The starting point is the Mishnah tells us here on the screen, Choletz v'choltzin, he can do Chalitza. We got into this conversation because we asked the question, well, why should he be able to do Chalitza? We would have thought it would be demeaning. And then we said, well, being demeaned is better than breaking a Torah law. He's not allowed to do Yibum. And then we said, well, if he can't do Yibum, he shouldn't have to do Chalitza. But then Julia came along and said, well, that's not fair on the woman. And so it's better that we don't have a chained woman and we do have a demeaned Kohen Gadol than we have a chained woman. And that was, I think, as far as we've got. But I just want to do it before we finish, because we're time's up. I just want to do a couple more lines and then we'll carry on. I just want to do this little section here and we'll carry on next time. Kar pasek v'tani, lo shna min ha'erusin v'lo shna min ha'nisuin. You will know that the marriage ceremony consists of two parts. Erusin, which is what we call betrothal, and nisuin, which is what we call marriage. Today, we do them, most people, not everybody, Chassidim don't, some Chassidim, but most people now do them together. The first part of the chuppah is the erusin, the betrothal. And then somebody reads out the ketubah. The whole reason for reading out the ketubah at a chuppah is to make a break between the first part of the ceremony, which is the erusin, the betrothal, and the second part, which is the nisuin. When you say the Sheva Brachot, that is the nisuin under the chuppah. So our ceremony, our wedding ceremony today, consists of the two sections all in one go. But it didn't used to be like that. It used to be that they would have the betrothal, the erusin, and then for up to a year, the betrothed would go back to her father's house and get ready for the wedding. And a year or so later, they would have the chuppah and they would complete the marriage. And the status of being betrothed is sort of being married. And those people today, there are very few today, but there are certain Hasidic sects that still do it that way. And if chas v'sholom, an erusin, a betrothal, breaks off, you need a sort of a get, even though you've not had the chuppah, which is why we don't do it. That's why we do them straight after, one after the other, with just the reading of the ketubah in between, so that nobody's got any chance to break it off in between, right? Otherwise, you'd need a get.
What's the engagement when they give
okay, so what do we call the engagement in Yiddish? Go on. What do we call?
A vort.
A vort, says Leslie. What's that word vort mean?
Words.
Word.
Yeah.
It's a word. It's a Yiddish word for word.
Yeah.
So what is a vort? You are giving your word that at some time in the future, there will be a betrothal and a marriage. It is not erusin. It is not a betrothal according to Jewish law, because if it was and you broke it off, you'd need a get.
Yes.
So it's just called a vort. I give you my word. It's not a contract. It's not a sign. You don't sign anything on a vort. You give your word, and that's why it's called a vort. So here, when it says the erusin, it's talking about the official erusin, the official betrothal, not the vort. Yes, Jeffrey?
I'm sure that when Rose and I had a vote, I was told if it breaks off, you have to get something like a get.
No, you don't. No, I'm 99% certain you will have not signed a contract when you got engaged.
Yeah.
No, we held
You held a vote and somebody smashed a plate and that was it.
yeah.
Yeah, it's not a legal document. It's not a legal thing. You don't need a get.
Only in Leeds, Jeff. Only in Leeds.
No, we had the vote in Manchester.
Oh.
Oh, well, it's possible in Manchester. It could be anything, any chumrah in Manchester. But no, you don't need a get after a vote. You do need a get after erusin. Now, what he is saying is, this is the chidush here. This piece of Gemarah tells us that it makes no difference whether the Chalitza or the Yibum is before the erusin or before the Nisuin. Why should there be a difference with our Kohen Gadol? Why should there be a difference? Julia? Why should there be a difference?
It's to do with the consummation of the marriage, presumably.
It is. It is. You might think, and we're going to do the reasons for this in a minute, but you might, not a minute, next week, in a minute, you might think that the Kohen Gadol could do Yibum with the betrothed of his brother when his brother dies. So they have an erusin, they have a betrothal. She goes back to her father's house to await the chuppah. She is betrothed to Mr. Cohen. Mr. Cohen sadly dies. Mr. Cohen's brother is the Kohen Gadol. The betrothed is what? Still a virgin. She's not a widow because there was no consummation of the marriage. She's only a betrothed. So you might think that the Kohen Gadol will be allowed to do Yibum in that situation. The Gemarah is going to tell us that you would be wrong. And that's what we're going to learn next time. And we're going to learn a very interesting halachic concept as to why you would be wrong to think that. The reason you would be wrong to think that is a concept which is very important in other halachot. And you'll see next week, Bezrat Hashem, cliffhanger, why that is the case. So to summarize, what we've talked about so far in this Chalitza is we've talked about the idea that a Kohen Gadol cannot do Yibum because he's only allowed to marry a virgin. And you might think that he can't do Yibum, so he can't do Chalitza. And we said, no, that's not the case. And then we had Julia's law, which says that we've got to worry about the woman's status. And so we don't worry too much about the Kohen Gadol's demeaning himself. More important that the woman is released. And now we've said that a Kohen Gadol, you might think that a Kohen Gadol could do Yibum with a betrothed woman who has not yet consummated her marriage, because there is that time span between the betrothal and the marriage, which we no longer have today. I suppose theoretically the husband could die while they're reading the ksuba in between the erusin and the nisura. I suppose that's a possibility, chas v'sholom, but it's not very likely. But it is a possibility, I suppose. So not likely to happen today, but it was certainly a possibility back in the day. Okay, any questions on what we've done so far on this subject? We will continue next week, Bezrat Hashem. No, that's not next week, is it? That's Tuesday, so it should be okay with the next Wednesday. Any questions? No? Okay. Shalom.
tov, everyone. Bye. Besorot tovot.
Thank you.
Wörter.
Thank you, Johnny.
Thank you.